Hello and welcome back to another chess video here. So we're going to be searching for another rapid game, and we're going up an ELO. We're against an 1850 as black here. So we have queen pawn and we're playing knight f6 against that. And we're going to go for a King's Indian defense if we're allowed to here. So we have the typical second move. Let's play g3. And bishop to g7, initiating a fianchetto on the king side here. And we have bishop to f4, which is not the normal developing square you see for the bishop in the King's Indian. I mean, it is a possibility. We'll play d6 here. And this is kind of like a pseudo-London system, I would describe it, with the move c4 instead of c3 in there, and the knight developed to c3 instead of d2. In a lot of like London systems, you'll see this development here. So I don't think we have to describe this any further. Let's castle and not take too much time up in the opening here. So now we have knight f3, a standard developing move we see in the London system, and we're gonna wait for this bishop to be developed before we consider playing bishop to g4 here. And I think knight bd7 is a good solid move in this position. We're gonna prepare to pile up for the e5 push here. All right, and we have bishop to d3 here, and I'm going to move rook to e8, and now we're getting ready for the e5 push here is my idea. We're preparing this, and maybe a knight to, maybe we could play knight to h5 already, but I think developing the rook to e8 is solid. Notice a lot of times in King's Indian games, you want to play queen to e8 instead of this move, but that would allow this pawn to be pressured here, and that is not something that we want in this variation. So now I think e5 is solidly prepared because takes, and we have two defenders. And notice how this move is even more, in a sense, devastating, because it threatens this fork on e4 here, which has two defenders because a knight and the rook. So let's play e5. That's like a perfect position. We want to play e5 in here. And now we take. Again, reinforcing. We have two defenders here, and he only has two attackers. We have the knight, and we have this. And now I believe we can simply play. Let's see. I don't think we can play e4 here because this knight is pinned. Our second defender is pinned here. But we can always play h6 here. And if he doesn't take his time, he can easily, I guess, blunder. So let's play h6. And we're looking for takes. I think the correct move is taking. If the bishop drops back, trying to maintain this pin, we hit him with g5 here, and then this fork is unstoppable. So he plays the correct move. He plays bishop takes, and we're going to take back with the knight here. And we're still doubling down on the threat of e4. And notice how the King's Indian defense kind of, it perfectly almost counters this this like pseudo-London system setup because of this powerful idea of the e4 e5 push. So now I think that e5 e4 push, set it in the wrong order, but now I think this is a strong move. I think also bishop to g4, maybe pinning the knight first, but that would run into h3. I think e4 is probably the most. We probably don't want to. Let's see, bishop g4, h3, bishop h5, and then if we have this, he can get rid of his queen before we can exploit the pan, I believe. And we don't want to develop our bishop here. And notice if we don't develop our bishop, he can deflect our rook away from this pawn here. So I think e4 is a solid choice. And if the queen trade happens, I think there are some tactics here we have along this file here to win our material back here. So let's say takes, 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 then we have takes, just obliterating essentially the queen side here because his pawn is advanced to c4 rather than pushed to c3. So I think white is in a little bit of trouble here. So we have knight to d4, essentially closing the diagonal here. But we could consider opening it back up here with c5, with a c5 push. And he's now threatening to win our pawn. So I think c5 is probably it's a decent time to play it here because it's a tempo move and it forces the knight away, maybe to a square like b6. If knight moves here, I think we could maybe think about putting our rook on d2, and that's kind of like pretty devastating. So c5. Yeah, I think now is an appropriate time to play c5. And I think knight b5 is probably, ill timing for that knight. Because, okay, now we're going into tactics here. So we want to spend a little bit more time calculating this position. But rook d2, obviously he cannot move our rook to kick us off his second rank. But what he can do is take with this bishop. And then we have knight takes. Knight takes here. But we can move our bishop to, let's say, f4, kicking his knight, and his knight has, we can't move our bishop to f4, excuse me, because our rook will be on d2, but our rook can take this pawn, and we have opened up this diagonal here. So I think rook to d2 looks like a strong move for me, and it's very active here. He's essentially forced to take this pawn. We're sacrificing the e4 pawn here. And if takes with a bishop, we take with the knight, opening up this diagonal here. Then whereupon knight takes, we can take with our rook here, opening up a potential discovery, and then we are probably going to win another pawn as well. So essentially, I think this move will almost win a pawn. So I think kicking the knight here is tempting, but it doesn't exactly work in our favor because the knight comes here, which is a tempo move. And the tempi, I think, are really important in this position. So I am looking at the move bishop to e6, and it's looking pretty appealing to me. we're still, in a sense, sacrificing this pawn, but the compensation we get from that is pretty devastating here if he allows this pawn to be taken. And if the knight jumps in here, we have too many attackers on the d5 square for him to maintain the knight here. If the knight jumps here, forking our rook, we might even have a tactic. Well, let's calculate. Let's calculate knight to c7 in response. I think we have bishop here, knight c7. We save the rook, takes the bishop, takes pawn, takes pawn, takes, and then we probably have enough compensation here. So I think this knight c7 allows us to double stack the rooks. And I think giving up the bishop is a fair trade in this position for the amount that we convert that, the exchange of the knight for the bishop, into piece activity essentially here, is what we're converting this advantage into. So yeah, I think, and now I'm probably expecting takes here. And this pawn also guards this square here, so it's not a terrible pawn here. Okay, so now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking there is most likely some tactics we can employ along this diagonal here, which has been weakened essentially by his b3 maneuver. So how do we find these tactics here is a good question. Can his knight I think let's see. We want definitely, I think, we almost definitely want to move our knight so that this knight is kicked off the diagonal and we can double stack our rooks here along the second file. His knight moves here, but it doesn't threaten to come back and win control of this file because of our pawn on c5. So I think a6 may just kick the knight back to a square that he doesn't want to be on, and then we might have some tactics here. So I think knight g5 is strong. And this is a tempo move, of course, because it hits the knight. Knight g4, excuse me. Looks pretty strong. And we're converting, I guess, an advantage along this diagonal here. We want to double stack our rooks. And let's leave it up to our opponent what they are playing here. So we have knight takes, threatening the pawn on c5, and threatening our rook. So now I think this pawn will probably fall, but we have compensation most likely in the fact that our rook will be returning to, our rook will be moving to the second rank here. So let's sacrifice this pawn and move our rook to the second rank here. squeeze this position for as much as we can get. And now, so now we have bishop back to d1, a very passive move, I would say, but the issue with it is it's skewering our piece here. It's skewering the rook to the knight. So is there a way we can save this position is a good question. I believe the best option here is to sacrifice, simply sacrifice, because losing an exchange is better than losing a full piece here. And I don't see any other way to avoid material loss. So we'll play for the sacrifice. And I must have misplayed this position at some point here, but we do have this pawn. So we have rook to d8 check. And he's looking to play here and win this pawn, most likely. So, the thing is that this will hit the board and be pretty devastating either way. Yeah, essentially this is resignable. So I think I'm going to resign. Alright, so let's analyze what went wrong in this opening here. What went wrong? I believe we played the opening pretty accurately. However, yeah, our opponent played very accurately in the middle game here. So bishop f4. And we have a solid opening here. Rook e8 and e5. This concept is very powerful against the London system, or the pseudo-London system as I like to call it here, because his knight is placed on c3 and the pawn pushes c4. So we have the bishop pin, which is correct move, and then bishop takes, has to take the knight, is basically the only move that will save this position from the fork arriving on e4 here. So e4 is actually a mistake in this position. I guess I should have played queen to e7 here, avoiding the queen trade. But c5 is pretty good, and rook d2. All right, bishop to e6, kind of a mistake. I guess I misjudged this fork here. I thought that the compensation we get along this diagonal would be better, but yeah, and the knight g4 was just a miscalculation in the sense that he gets the skewer there. So we resign. And there's unstoppable threats of king moves here. We have rook c2, winning the pawn. And if king moves back to h7, we have something like, well, no, but our bishop has been pinned, and then we're going to lose pretty soon after that, after his other rook comes in to the d7 square. So excellent moves from our opponent. And I believe I've analyzed this opening before in other games, but the middle game is very much where it's been misplayed here. Essentially, the e4 push, you want to avoid the queen trade, and this variation is something we learned from this loss here. Avoid the queen trade, and then you have other ideas of maintaining piece activity. Maybe a fianchetto of this bishop here, and a rook to d8 would be a pretty powerful setup, is what my instincts now tell me. So this will be the end of that video here. As I've analyzed this opening, I believe in another video, we just misplayed the middle game here. So hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.